This is the best
Do you hear me?
of the Paul Finebaum Show podcast.
You know, I have people ask me, Charlie, how do you talk about college football all year long? And I'm sure people ask you the same question. How do you talk about golf all year long?
You know, golf has just so much depth to it. And just like football, there's a whole bunch of little games in the big game. And one of the things that's really cool growing up here in this area, you know, I played a lot of golf. But when I was a kid, you couldn't really learn a lot about golf because there wasn't a golf channel. There wasn't the internet. And you couldn't learn about the architects. You couldn't learn about how golf courses are built. You couldn't learn about the history of the game. You couldn't learn the storylines like we do now and the instruction. I mean, everybody that follows golf typically plays golf. They want to play a little bit better. So you take a kid growing up right now who's 12, 13 years old and loves golf and plays a lot of it and watches the Golf Channel and watches our programming, sure. You can really, by the time you're 18, 20 years old, understand how much depth there is to our game, how many subjects there are to talk about within golf, and it's it's a puzzle, that can't really ever be put together. Nobody masters golf, and it amazes me, really how many places there are to go in golf, just like following college football. No doubt.
You grew up in Fort Mill, which is in the shadows of, I don't mean that literally, but down the road from Rock Hill, which is a high school football power, producing a lot of talent. You went to Georgia Tech. I said that jokingly.
I know you rolled your eyes when you said you went to Georgia Tech. I know we're not SEC, but by the way, we have beat Georgia 2 of the last 3 years. Yeah. I'm just saying.
Now we're live. I was about to kill that segment. Georgia Tech was in the SEC, proud member until they committed some unpardonable sin and have been excommunicated. You grew up a football fan. In addition to being a professional golfer, your son is a football player and is now on the campus at Missouri. Yeah. My son Hayden, he is he was redshirt freshman last year. He's up in camp right now. Of course, he was up there in Columbia, Missouri, all summer for workouts, and he's currently 4th on the depth chart. He's working really hard. He loves the college football environment. But I'm gonna tell you what, Paul. I've always been a fan of college football, and it's easy to sort of get down on your team when they don't play very well, but seeing how hard these kids work, I mean, they really don't have an off season. I mean, they really only have a few weeks off, but seeing how hard they work, they're up, you're sleeping in, folks. They're getting up at 5 o'clock and they're heading into workouts. They got meetings late. They go at it year round, and it's changed my attitude, about the game. I just didn't know how much work went into it. Well, it's interesting because it comes, Charlie, in the heels of this explosion yesterday by Josh Rosen, who's a quarterback at UCLA, and he talked about the challenge of balancing football and what they're supposedly there for, to get an education.
Yeah, and it really is challenging. And you mentioned Georgia Tech. I played golf at Georgia Tech. I thought I sort of worked hard at golf. I saw listen, I'm not one of the golfers that claims to be an athlete. I'm a golfer. But, I thought I worked pretty hard at it. But to see what these football players do, basketball players, I mean, really across all sports, and it really is tough. The pressure that you have to perform day in and day out, and the time demands of being an athlete, and then go sit in the classroom, and it's challenging. I'm gonna tell you what, if you're a college athlete out there anywhere and you graduate, you get a degree, you know what, you've pulled off something really, really strong, because there's only so many hours in a day.
You talk about there's no bad place to play golf in college, but in Atlanta, with the rich tradition of that city and down the road, I mean, that had to be pretty cool.
It was a lot of fun, and of course, Bobby Jones is a Georgia Tech graduate and co-founder of Augusta National, and so we got to play a lot of the really good golf courses in Atlanta. But the cool thing was, every year, some of Bobby Jones's best buddies were the original members at Augusta National, and a group of alums who were members at Augusta National would take our whole team down to play every year, and some of them were a little bit on up there in age, and there was one gentleman who's passed away now. We had to go by the nursing home to pick him up, and because the rules at Augusta, you have to have one member there for every 3 guests, and you have to have them there, and we kept thinking, we hope Mr. Reith made it through the night last night because we got to get him on the grounds tomorrow, but it's really neat to go down there and get a chance to play and hear Bobby Jones' stories firsthand from some of his buddies. And it was some memories that I'll never forget. Now every year when I go back to cover the Masters, not only do I know the storylines of the players and the history of the golf tournament and all that, but I know firsthand stories that I heard from Bobby Jones, which I have a tremendous amount of respect for his career, how he played. But, I mean, you hear all the stories about him being a gentleman. Firsthand, I can tell you he truly was.
Wow, how interesting. Charlie Reimer with us. Charlie, it's almost become a cliche question to ask anyone in golf about Tiger Woods. You probably see him more than most of us down in Orlando or in that area, I should say. What's going on with him, and is he going to be able to come back?
Of course, everybody wants to know that. I spent some time with him one-on-one, actually about 6 weeks before his incident, and which he's going through right now, trying to figure out his illegal issue with the car incident. But he is someone who's dealt with chronic pain for quite some time, and what he's going through is pretty common for people who have dealt with chronic pain for a long time. And I'll just tell you this, it's my wish that he gets healthy, he gets pain-free, and he gets everything sorted out where he can have a life, a little more normal life, and be able to enjoy the accomplishments he's had, because everybody in our business owes a huge debt of gratitude to Tiger Woods for what he did for golf. So there's people want to see him come back and play, but first he's got to get healthy and get happy. And if that happens, I just hope we get a chance maybe to see him play some golf in the future. And anything that we get from this point forward, I just view as a bonus.
You are a golf commentator, so I think you would be a pretty good person to ask you. Nicholas dabbled in commentary for a long time. Trevino, Fuzzy. So many other golfers along the way. Faldo now, of course, Johnny Miller. Do you see Tiger Woods sitting in the 18th tower one day?
I used to think, no, that's not going to happen. But I think that he wants to be involved in golf somehow, some way. It wouldn't surprise me if he gave it a shot, because he is sharp as a tack. He wouldn't have any problem pulling it off. But his interest in golf, he's doing a little bit of golf design. I'll tell you what, he's got an amazing foundation, the Tiger Woods Foundation. He's got a couple of centers across the country. He does a lot of things to help a lot of young people, and he's going to stay connected to golf in that way. But if he wants to, I think they can find a spot for him. And I love hearing him talk, because every now and then he'll come in. He basically co-hosts a few events. He'll come in, and his comments are always spot on. But the hard thing for him about that would be most of his buddies now are on the PGA Tour champions. He knows more about the older guys than he does the young guys. So I think if he came in to do it, people would certainly be interested in what he has to say.
And I don't want to be a critic, but usually with most commentators, Faldo's got a few majors. They all have some accomplishment. He would have a hard time, though, because he has so many. Because you're not going to be talking about that 74 U.S. Open, because he's got 13 other ones to talk about. Yeah,
he definitely. And when you've done it, and you say this is how it feels, well, you're telling the truth. A lot of times, folks will ask me a question. How does it feel coming down the stretch? And I won every level I competed at, except for the PGA Tour. I was close a couple times, but and I always try and stay away from the questions that I hadn't actually had that experience. But you've got to, if you're going to sit in the 18th tower covering golf for one of the networks, I think you just, one of the prerequisites has to be that you've got to be a major champion.
But you've also raised a good point. Certainly, you've played the game, you know it. You're not encumbered, though, by whether you were in a playoff to win the Masters. But talk about your approach. You come in every day. It's a freewheeling show. It's fun. You do play-by-play for the majors on satellite. What is your approach when you get behind a microphone?
Well, one of the things that I'm very, very passionate about is growing this game of golf. I've been in it so long that the reason I'm passionate about it is golf's a positive influence in society, and it does so much good. You look at the money that it raises for different charities. The PGA Tour alone is over a couple $2 billion in earnings. And when you get young people in particular hooked on golf, the doors that it opens as they go through life, because I've seen what it's done for me and my family, it's unbelievable. So you've got the governing bodies in the PGA of America, of which I'm a member, the PGA Tour, Augusta National, USGA, NBC Sports, Golf Channel. We're all into growing the game of golf, primarily because we think it's great for kids. It's great for people that play golf. Older people, I mean, what brings people together for 4 hours where they can get out, get some exercise, be in a pretty place? Granted, you're probably going to be a little frustrated playing from time to time, but golf does it.
Where do you play you can get a 4-hour round?
Yeah, well, that's a good point. 4.5 hours, but it does. It brings people together, and I'm really passionate about that. And the seat that I sit in allows me to do that, especially with young people. If you're sitting there watching this, you don't know much about golf, and you got some young people, your grandparent, your parent, get a golf club in their hands. Get them out to a golf course, and if they get hooked on it, you watch and see. It's going to open some doors for them as they move through life.
Let's end talking about the Missouri Tigers and your son, because being a Georgia Tech grad, I doubt you were paying much attention to the Missouri football program until recently. So how locked in will you be this fall?
Well, I got a chance to go some of the games last year. They finished up by beating Vanderbilt and Arkansas at home. I actually scored some sideline passes for that Arkansas game. It was the best game they played all year. The defense held in the second half, and I'm down there by the governor of Missouri watching the game, and I ran out on the field with the team. I mean, it was really an unbelievable experience. But no, they've had a tough couple of years, and the school and the football program. But you know what, Coach Odom he's running an accountable program, and they're doing things right, and I love seeing that. I love seeing the work ethic, and I'm just thrilled. My son is part of an amazing program. He's a preferred walk-on there. He's trying to work his way up to scholarship. He's putting the time in, and he really enjoys the school. He loves the experience. You know, I mean, are you kidding me? You get to go to an SEC school, which isn't quite Georgia Tech, but that's okay. But he loves the experience, and you know
we'll
what?
See about that Labor Day night.
We're hoping he gets to play. It's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take some breaks, but either way, the time that he's putting in now, I'm just telling him, in life, long term, it's going to pay off, and I think he understands that.
Okay, final question from the college football world. And I've played with Steve Spurrier too many times, and I know he's not the answer. Who's the best college football coach that you played golf with?
You know, I've had a chance to play golf with Paul Johnson a couple times, and he's a fearless coach. You know that triple option. I mean, who goes for it more on fourth down than Paul Johnson? And he might not be the best I've ever played with. He's probably a 7 or an 8. But Coach, really? I'll take you every day of the week, because he ain't gonna back down from anything. He ain't gonna back down from beating Georgia again this year.
I've never played golf with Butch Jones, but Tennessee's my school, so we'll have to get a foursome up.
Tennessee's your school. Yeah. Who do they open up against? Where?
By the way, I'm available anytime you want to go down to Augusta. We'll settle this.
I'm looking forward to watching Georgia Tech beat Tennessee in the opener in Atlanta.
We'll talk the next day. Charlie, many thanks.
Thank you.
What a pleasure. We'll keep an eye on your son. We'll be in Missouri early in the season, I believe. So thanks so much, Charlie Reimer from the Golf Channel, his son at the University of Missouri. We'll take a short break.
Number 9, Hayden Reimer.
You're listening to the Paul Finebaum Show podcast.
Phil, it's always a great pleasure to welcome you to our program, and look forward to repeating what we had here a couple of weeks ago. Thank you so much. Good afternoon.
Hey, good afternoon, Paul. And want to remind the listeners out there, feel free. 130 teams out there. Ask me about any one of them. I'll get your answers for you.
Okay, we're going to lock Phil in here in a minute and start taking your phone calls. But, Phil, we're about a week and a half into camp. Not much has happened. What are you watching for now as we do that slow crawl toward the beginning of the college football season? What can change now?
I guess about the only major thing in my mind, Paul, is maybe who wins some of the tighter quarterback battles out there, who emerges as the starters. But Not a lot is going to change in the month, and I'll remind callers of the, and listeners of the 2014. Remember, Ohio State was picked very high, and then all of a sudden Braxton Miller was out for the year, and everybody said, well, Ohio State can't win. Came in picked second in the East. That year, Ohio State ended up winning the national title. So don't overreact to one player being out for the year. Football's a team sport.
Phil Steele is with us. We certainly can blow you out about any subject, me, not Phil. But I want Phil to be able to talk to you because it's a rare chance to get a chance to talk to him. The phone number is 855-242-7285, 855-242-7285. Why don't we start running through the calls and start with Frank in California for Phil Steele. Many thanks to the call. Let's go right ahead, Frank. You're on with Phil.
Hello.
Hello, Frank.
This is Frank.
Go right ahead. You're on with Phil Steele.
Okay. Oh, yeah, I was wondering if Alabama was going to play against Oklahoma for the championship. Do you think Oklahoma has a chance?
All right, appreciate the call, Frank. And, a matchup like that would be a long ways away, but let's assume that they are playing for the national title. I would say Oklahoma would have a chance. They'd have a quarterback in Baker Mayfield. That offensive line, I rate number one in the country at the end of the season this year, and they would have been playing at that level. And then really your biggest question mark you have with Oklahoma would be, A, how's Lincoln Riley going to fare as a head coach since they're in the title game? I'm going to say they're doing pretty well. And secondly, the defense, will it be improved? And once again, if they're in the title game, they've got the talent on that side of the ball, they would be improved. I think anybody that lines up with Alabama in the national title game would have a chance. So I think it'd be a great game. Appreciate the call, Frank.
Thank you very much, Frank. Good to hear from you. Let's go to Lance next from Tennessee. Lance, you are on with Phil Steele, just out the 2017 Phil Steele college football preview.
Oh, man, I got the book. I really appreciate your love for the Gators this year. I ain't heard it in a while. But tell me this, a lot of people feel like the defense is going to slack off, but I would argue that they replace them with a all-SEC collaborator at every level of the defense. How do you feel about the defense for the Gators coming in?
I feel last year when you look at Florida that they had a legitimate top 10 defense. This year they may be a shade outside the top 10, but still a top 20 defense. And I think the big difference with Florida is going to be that they actually have an offense this year. I project them going from 23 points per game, which they've averaged the last 2 years, up to 33. But let's focus on the defense because that's what your question was about. Last year's injuries, I think, really help out a lot because you got a guy like Jabari Zuniga who was thrown into the fire last year as a freshman, had to play, ended up starting 4 games. He had 6 sacks last year. Kylan Johnson was forced into action. David Reese. A whole bunch of those freshmen had to play last year, and I think that's going to help them this year. Overall, talent-wise, I'm going to say just a notch below last year, but the offense is much improved, and I rate their special teams number 3. Appreciate the call, Lance.
Oh, okay, thanks.
We go from Lance to Daryl. Daryl is in Columbus, Georgia for Phil Steele. Daryl?
Yes. Hey, Phil, I want to get – I don't think it matters who comes out of the East anyway. Nobody's going to beat Alabama. They're just too loaded. They're too loaded on defense. Just got too many players. But I want to get your opinion on the player that they got in trouble and did not get suspended by Nick Saban. I want to get your thoughts on that. Because my opinion is the law is the law. It don't matter how you interpret it. And I think Saban has to send a message to the rest of the team.
Hold on a second. We're talking about Deshaun Hand, and Phil's here to answer specific football questions, not to give opinions on suspensions or not. I answered your question yesterday. Do you have a specific question that Phil could help you with?
No, that's what I called to talk about. I'll call back in because I want to finish my conversation with you in reference to that. All right.
Now, we'll ask you that about Deshaun Hand, though, forgetting whether he'll play in the game or not, which he will. How important is he, Phil?
Well, I think Hand is very important, especially early in the season, Paul. I like the depth on the defensive line, but there's a lot of guys that are untested. They've got Isaiah Buggs behind them, a guy that's just getting better each and every day. So, there's good talent, but if I'm Alabama, I'd prefer to have Deshaun Hand in the lineup along with Daron Payne up front. I think that would help. So I think overall a big part of that defensive line for Alabama.
Thank you very much for the call. Ray in Knoxville, you're on with Phil Steele. Go right ahead.
Hey, Paul, how you doing, buddy?
We are doing great. Thank you very much.
All right, there was a comment made about the Vols earlier by Matt Stinchcomb. He said the quarterbacks weren't going to be that good, so
Ray, Matt Stinchcomb was on. He was not very positive on Tennessee. Your outlook on the Vols?
I think Tennessee's an under-the-radar team this year, Ray, because last year all the hype was there, and they didn't quite live up to it. Remember the massive amount of injuries they did suffer on the defensive side of the ball. I think that hurt them down the stretch, especially when they were giving up the 740 yards to Missouri, 608 to Vanderbilt, games like that. So I think overall, when you look at Tennessee defensively, 7 starters back, a lot of guys got forced in the lineup last year. They'll be stronger there. And offensively, Quentin Dormady, Jarrett Garantino, those are a couple of guys that I think can come in and play. They're not going to be the type of a running quarterback Josh Dobbs was. They're not going to have the senior leadership, but I think they can get stuff done. You look at the schedule this year, it's what concerns me. They have to play Florida on the road. They draw both Alabama and LSU out of the West, which is difficult. They also have a couple other tough games this year, but I'm looking at a Tennessee team that can get to 8-9 wins, match last year's record. A lot less hype on them, so I think they're under the radar coming into the season. And if you want to know whether or not they can contend for the East, watch that September 16th game in the Swamp. If they somehow come out of there with a win, they're a contender. If not, it's probably a battle for second place. Appreciate the call, Ray.
You bet. Ron is up next in Texas. Ron, you are on with Phil Steele.
Well, Paul, I actually called to talk to you about some stuff, but I'll ask Phil a question.
Well, thank you.
How in the world, and if you'll put me on hold after this call, I'd love to come back. I'm a first-time caller, and I'm really excited about beginning a dialogue with you. I'm a 65-year-old Aggie in Texas. But let's talk about Texas. And I don't hate Texas. I've got a daughter that graduated from there. Everybody's picking Tom Herman in Texas to be so good. They have to play USC, Oklahoma, Okie State, West Virginia, TCU. That's 5 losses. They could lose to Maryland and K-State. What do you think, Phil?
I think you're going to be mildly surprised with Texas this year. I think they're going to perform better than expected. You look at the overall talent this team has, and I'm going to single out the defensive line and defensive backs. These are 2 units that are just loaded with talent. They look great coming off the bus. They've got size, they've got speed, they've got athleticism that you want for those 2 units, yet they've underperformed the last couple of years. I think Todd Orlando steps into a good situation as a defensive coordinator. He'll get them living up to their talent level on the defense. I don't think they'll be dominant, but they'll be much improved over last year's D, which gave up over 31 points per game. Offensively, Tom Herman's got Shane Bussell back, Chris Warren at running back, an offensive line with 3 starters back up front as well. They've got talent. And the one thing I really like about Tom Herman is when he was at Houston, a group of 5 conference, they play 6 ranked teams. He got them to beat all 6 ranked teams. So he gets the most out of the talent on hand. I think he'll get a lot out of Texas. I think they're a contender in the Big 12 this year. They'll clearly have a winning record, but I do think they'll fall a little short of winning the Big 12, but a much improved year if you're a Texas fan. I know that's not what you wanted to hear, Ron.
Hastings is in Tuscaloosa. Hastings, you are next up for Phil.
Hey, Phil. I called once again to discuss something with Paul, but I actually got a good question for you. So this quarterback race in Auburn and the competition between Jarrett Stidham and Sean White, I think, is a little bit more competitive than people realize. If they're able to get it together, how do you see their season going and their success rate by the time they play Alabama in the final game in November? And do you think they have an opportunity to potentially move into the SEC West and have a shot to enter the playoffs?
Well, I think any champion of the SEC has a shot of making the playoffs, regardless if they lose to Clemson early in the year or not. And if Jarrett Stidham, and as much as it is a quarterback competition right now, or so says Gus Malzahn, Jarrett Stidham is going to be your starting quarterback. He's got Petway and Johnson at running back to work with, a solid offensive line. And I think underrated for Auburn this year is the defense. Last year they gave up just 17.1 points per game. They've got 7 starters back. I rate them with my number 10 D-line, number 14 linebackers, number 11 DBs. And how about the special teams? Another underrated group. When you got a kicker like Daniel Carlson, you've got one of the better special teams units out there. I think if any team this year beats Alabama in the SEC, it would be Auburn in the Iron Bowl. They get that game at home. It's week 12 of the season. It's a rivalry game. So of all the SEC teams during the regular season, I give them the best shot of beating Alabama. And that game right there could very well determine the West. I think it's going to be a very good year for Auburn. Appreciate the call, Hastings.
You're listening to the Paul Finebaum Show podcast.
You're not worth a flip. You're listening to Love Advice with Leanne. Caller, you're on the air.
Hi, Leanne. Long-time listener, first-time caller. Why, in your professional opinion, do you never take my calls off the air?
Is this Carl?
Yep, it's Carl. I mean, we had a few dates. Everything was great. I thought,
Well, when you switch to Geico, you could save a lot of money on car insurance.
Okay, awesome.
You should call them.
I will.
Geico, because saving 15% or more on car insurance is always a great answer.
You're listening to the Paul Finebaum Show podcast.
Put a little cherry on the top.
Joe is in Pennsylvania. Joe, welcome to our program. Good afternoon.
Hey, good afternoon, Paul. Good afternoon, Phil. Hey, got a big question, if you guys could answer it. I'm a Big Ten guy, of course, up here. But Alabama football, Bo Scarborough, what is his status at this point? Is he healthy?
Oh, yeah, Bo is definitely healthy, and I think he'll be close to, if not 100% for the season. But I wouldn't put him in a Heisman contender list because I think Alabama's got too many good running backs like Damian Harris and Najee Harris back there at running back where they're going to end up splitting carries. It's dangerous. I think Alabama's got the best set of running backs in the country this year. Even a guy like Josh Jacobs, fourth string, loaded at running back. But I think you're going to see three dynamic guys.
Najee Harris, because what I hear from Tuscaloosa, I'm curious what you hear. People are just salivating over this young man.
Any other team in the country, Paul, he's probably starting. I mean, he is that good. He's 6'2", 227. He's got the size, got the speed, and I think he's going to have a dynamic year. But like I said, I wouldn't put on any one of these Alabama running backs a chance to win the Heisman because I feel they're going to be splitting the carries this year. And it's a great problem for Nick Saban to have is how do you keep all three guys happy?
Well done. Thank you, Joe, for the phone call. Another Joe in Tennessee. You're on with Phil Steele. Go right ahead.
Yes, sir. I'd like to speak to the SEC Nation and tell them that here in Knoxville, when you come to a game here, we're your host and you're a visitor in our house. And as far as I know, we try to be friendly to any team that comes into our house.
Good deal, Joe. Thanks for that. You have a question for Phil?
Sir. I'd like to know what he thinks about Josh's chance in the NFL, if he agrees with Gruden, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on what Tennessee may or may not do as close as Buster Jones plays his cards to his vest.
Okay, thank you very much.
Appreciate it, Joe. I like the Georgia Tech game at the start of the year and the fact that they get to practice defending the option the entire month of August, so I think that's a good advantage there. The Florida game is going to be huge. The Georgia game at home, I feel, is going to be huge. And if what you say, Joe, which is about Tennessee and the home crowd, they take care of business at home this year. They've got the potential to easily match last year's 9-win total and be a contender in the East. As far as Dobbs in the NFL, I think it's going to be a little bit of a developmental project. I don't think he can step into the NFL right now and start the first year or two, but he's got the tools there, just needs to be developed. Appreciate the call, Joe.
Thank you very much. We'll continue with more calls. Sky is in Birmingham. Sky, you're next with Phil Steele.
Hey, Phil. Former Auburn head coach Pat Dye was quoted as saying a couple weeks ago that this is the most talent he's ever seen on the Auburn offensive line. So I wanted to ask you about that, and I also wanted to ask you, what is Clemson going to look like in the post-Deshaun Watson era? What are they going to look like this year compared to last? I'll hang up and listen. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks. And I'm very high on Auburn's offensive line. In fact, I rate them number 6 in the country. That's quite a statement from Pat Dye. I didn't read that particular statement, but if he said that, he's had some pretty talented offensive lines at Auburn. Now, granted, players today are bigger, stronger, faster than they were 20 years ago, and it is an impressive-looking offensive line, but I do feel one of the best in the country. And here's the thing about Clemson. I think they're being a little underrated heading into the year. When most folks break down a team, they look at the quarterback, running back, and receivers. And if you do that with Clemson, well, they lose Deshaun Watson. They lose their top running back, Wayne Gallman. They lose their top wide receiver, and Mike Williams. They lose their tight end, and Jordan Leggett. This team's in a rebuilding mode. But when I look at Clemson, I see a team that's only had 3 and 4 returning starters on defense the last 2 years and yet been dominant This year they've got 7 starters back on D. I feel the best defensive line in the country. Linebackers and DBs are there, and also offensive line, very strong. Number 5, I rate them in the country. The running back, I think Tavian Feaster can top Gallman's stats. Talking to the offense coordinator Jeff Scott last year, he's really high on this receiving core. So the big question is quarterback. Who's going to replace Watson is the big question, but they get Florida State at home. They get Auburn at home, and they may be favored in every game this season by the time the season ends up. So don't fall asleep on Clemson despite the losses of the skilled players. Appreciate the call, Sky.
Let's continue with more calls. Phil is in Georgia with Phil Steele. Go right ahead.
Hey, I just have questions about Jacob Eason and Georgia's offense, and if you think that if Jacob Eason is going to live up to potential, maybe does he have chances of winning Heisman this year, maybe even next year, or?
Yeah, and the fun thing about the Heisman, Phil, is that you generally have to top last year's stats. Well, for Jacob Eason's case, there's no problem there. He'll top last year's stats. I think what expectations are pretty high for him, completing 55%, 16 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, not great numbers last year. He's got a decent receiving core. The running backs, of course, is going to be the key for every defensive coordinator coming in. They're going to be keying on Chubb and Michelle and company back there. The big question mark to me on the Georgia's offense is that offensive line. They struggled last year. They only have 2 returning starters. They're probably going to end up playing a couple of Frosh, I would think, will emerge in the starting role by the end of the year. And how that offensive line performs is going to be the key to Georgia's success. But if there is team success, Easton will have a good year throwing the football then, and they would have that chance. But I wouldn't put him on my short list of Heisman contenders just yet. Thanks for the call, Phil.
You're listening to the Paul Finebaum Show podcast.
Put a little cherry on the top.
With Matt Stinchcomb, I was asking you during the break about I think it was on SI.com to give proper attribution. These two correspondents were debating how boring Alabama's dynasty has become. And on one level, it is. I read the new poll out today from Sports Illustrated, and Alabama number 1.
It is. Look, the idea that you think that you know how the season is going to end up. So it's who is Alabama going to play for the national title? That is a boring concept. I mean, I am appreciative of the fact that Clemson was able to get a national title. I like the fact that Ohio State was able to win a national title, albeit under this new arrangement of the college football playoff. The whole idea years ago under the BCS was to nationalize the game. Let's get away from these regionalized ideas that, our part of the country is better than your part of the country. Let's actually play these games in a national title game. Right. So that's no longer this fictional national championships. And so the fact that there's some semblance of balance, I don't know if it's geographic balance given the fact that it's been Clemson, Alabama back-to-back years, is a good thing. It's a good thing for college football. I think it's good for fan interest. And I think the folks that are outside of this conference and maybe didn't even participate or coach, maybe they don't appreciate just how remarkable it is to be as dominant as Alabama as a program has been really since, not just the dawning of the BCS era, but from 2006 on.
I say this to a Georgia man, but they've only won 1 of the last 4 national championships.
Right. Just the one. Yeah, golly. Are you talking about from like a Georgia perspective? Is that something?
I do want to ask you about Georgia because start with Eason, and let's just start with Eason.
Sure. Well, I mean, a lot starts with Eason. I mean, you look at it, it's such a highly touted, and I think it's not debatable. The skill set is there. The arm talent would be there. How it has translated on the field, I don't think many people would want it to be replicated again this year from the Georgia program. They don't want to see a similar performance in that there are throws that should be made that weren't, overthrows, underthrows, reads that were poorly made. And just the general operation of the offense. So you're asking a guy to do some things offensively that are different from what they were doing in high school. He's looking to the sideline. Now he's in a huddle. He's taking shots from snaps from shotgun. Now he has to get under center. Just the mechanics of those, all those boxes have now been checked. He should be comfortable with that. And they're going to need some semblance of a passing game because you saw an underperforming offensive line a year ago, but with no downfield threat, and defenses could easily just collapse on a run game that basically vanished. And you've got two very talented, if not among the most talented backs in Sony Michel and Nick Chubb, who were rendered basically useless offensively. You saw it versus Florida where they basically abandoned the run, so we just can't do it anymore. These defenses did not feel threatened by any other element of the offense, and it starts with that quarterback and his ability to at least find some of those targets downfield, and the wide receiver's got to step up to complement it.
You go from Georgia's quarterback situation, which there are criticism of, but it's settled, at least for now, to Florida, where everyone has an opinion and everyone knows someone who knows someone,
of course,
who knows who the quarterback will be.
Yeah, the whispers in the quarterback room, of course. Somebody's got a buddy who's an equipment manager who's a roommate with somebody who knows that Malik Zaire has the edge. What's so interesting to me is, and it makes sense that there's that much attention around that position. We all know that we've seen entire coaching staffs, eras end. Florida's probably maybe the best example. If you don't have an answer at quarterback, no matter how good your coach is, he might not last, and your team might not achieve at a level that they otherwise should have. Will Muschamp knows that better than anybody, and he'll bring it up. You got to have a quarterback. Jim McElwain has kind of debunked that in the SEC East, where he's saying, I might need to start a season with a quarterback. I don't necessarily have to finish the season with a quarterback. I don't even have to keep my quarterback. He might transfer, and I'll pick up another one. This year, the idea that Malik Zaire has that element, more of a run element to his game, I think in today's game, the way it is, despite what I think will be one of the better offensive fronts, it's certainly a much improved offensive front at Florida, to have that run element, to have the mobility at the quarterback position, because the defensive lines are so much better, I think, than the offensive fronts, frankly. That is an appealing aspect to have at your disposal. And if you're a guy like Jim McElwain, who has obviously operated independent of that skill set before, that would be an attractive toy. But Malik Zaire, you look at him from a career production standpoint, he comes walking onto that campus. Do you anoint him your starter right away? Obviously, they're going to say there's a competition existing. I read somewhere the other day that Malik Zaire's got the edge. That must have been, another one of those, hey, I ran into a guy at a bus stop.
I saw somebody yesterday who told me he had talked to somebody.
Did he? Where did he talk to him? Was it in the cereal aisle at Publix or something?
Frozen foods.
Yeah, frozen foods. That's where all the scuttlebutt's going on, Paul.
Okay, we're moving through the East because we don't pay as much attention to it as maybe we should. But Tennessee has not settled its quarterback position. It doesn't seem like Tennessee's really settled anything. Your take?
I think this is going to be a really tough year for Tennessee. I feel like last year was Tennessee's year, and it wasn't. I felt like when you look at that roster, that needed to be a division title for the Tennessee program. If you're looking at it in a 2-year window, obviously it's never really lined up, or it hasn't, at least under Butch Jones. Some of that is, the residue from a previous coaching staff where you had an offensive front that had to learn on the job, which this is arguably the toughest conference to do that in, that now actually has some experience. The problem is that that's incongruent with some of your skill position, and specifically at the quarterback spot. So I think that, that given an underperforming defense, a defense that struggled, I think more than many thought it would, even though the East is attainable, even though the East is accessible, I think it's going to be a tough road to hoe for Tennessee this year.
Year 5, which is not to put any unneeded pressure, but, shouldn't you begin to define your program by year 5?
That's the idea.
If you get to year 5?
Yeah, if you get to year 5, right? This conference, right, it's either if you're not contending for a national title in the second year, it's what's going on.
Exactly.
And it's been attained by others. But, no question. It's true of Tennessee. You look at Brett Bielema. He's been on the job now 5 years. Yeah. That pressure, that's kind of a quiet
I hear people say if you take away the national championship appearance from Malzahn, well, you can't.
No, you can't. Exactly. If you act as if in national title contention season, that just didn't happen. Well, you can't really do that, I'm afraid.
But if you take it away, it's pretty average.
You're listening to the Paul Finebaum Show podcast. You're listening to the Paul Finebaum Show podcast.
You're not worth a thrill.
Since you come with us, and we will get some phone calls in here for him and expose him to what we have to.
Should I go boil a mouthpiece, Paul? Is that what you're telling me?
Austin in Lexington with Matt Stinchcomb right here on the program. Good afternoon.
Hey, Paul, I got 2 questions for you. First one, you look at Kentucky's schedule, and they got more talent, but the road's always been through Florida. For 30 years, we haven't been able to get through Florida. But if you look at South Carolina and Florida, the 3rd and 4th games of the season, if they can get through those 2, what does that mean for the rest of their season?
Well, you look at Kentucky. I'm pretty high on Kentucky, and the context for any East Division team is that there isn't a dominant program right now. That's not meant as a slight to the Florida teams that have been able to win that division a couple of years. But yeah, I mean, if you look at if that scenario plays out the way you just described it, Austin, then to me, you're looking at a Kentucky Wildcat team that might get their first swing at an East Division title. I'm not certain that they're able to accomplish that. What's challenging to me in the East Division this year is that, the East-West comparison, outside of Alabama, if you look at some of those contests a season ago, the intra-conference contests, the East fared pretty well versus the West Division. But you got to be, exclusive of what are the more dominant programs. For Kentucky this year, they got to be so much better on the defensive front than they were a year ago. They've made changes there. They got a new defensive line coach in there. Obviously, they're transitioning at the defensive coordinator position. Mark Stoops, more engaged in that regard. I think there's opportunity. I still think that Kentucky has to play over their heads to win that division title. But, and it's a season ago. Finally you get to the postseason. You are one catch away, a very catchable ball, ends up being a drop ball versus Georgia, from getting a Georgia victory. I mean, you look at the victories. They got a walk-off field goal victory over Mississippi State, or in a loss versus the Bulldogs. It's a team that is kind of teetered. They got to the postseason, and if they can somehow survive that stretch, as you just described, the South Carolina, Florida games, then yeah, I mean, the East Division is there because you have a hard time. Kentucky and South Carolina, to me, are the dark horse candidates in the East Division. They would have defeated one. They would have defeated what is arguably one of the top 2 teams in the East Division anyway, in the conference in Florida. You got Georgia sitting out there, and depending on what their schedule looks like and their win-loss record at the time,
I really like their. Obviously, they play Mississippi State every year. But they have Mississippi State and Ole Miss. I mean, that's hard to get any better than that.
It's the best draw you can get out of the West Division. And if like Austin's laying out, if they're able to get through Florida and South Carolina unscathed, then you're facing Georgia late in the season. And depending on what's happened with Georgia, who obviously they're going to get a draw out of the West that is more formidable in that you've got Mississippi State. That's a winnable football game. Then you got Auburn. Yeah. And Auburn saying people are saying, and maybe rightfully so, that Auburn might be the only team that could topple Alabama in the West Division this year. That's a tougher draw. Yeah. So if Kentucky can get through that, I mean, the folks in Big Blue Nation, they can actually start becoming big-time football fans for the first time in a long time.
It's a little better than LSU's draw on the other side, going to Tennessee and Florida.
Not ideal. Hey, listen, LSU.
Some of it's their own fault. But.
Yeah, they brought the Florida thing on themselves, I'm afraid, and it didn't work out last year. It's going to be even more challenging this year. The homecoming thing, a lot's been made of that, but LSU, a lot of people are fired up about LSU. I think it's inarguable about the talent that is there. There's a ton of transition that's gone on over there. And it's not just at the head coaching spot. And now you're bringing in a new offensive coordinator. And then you look at some of the not only attrition due to graduation, the NFL draft is always a concern in Baton Rouge, but now injury. The offensive line perhaps is not going to be as strong as it was a season ago. I thought it was kind of shaky coming into the year. Darius Geis is a singular talent, a really good football player. There's depth behind him as a game-changing talent.
Down there before.
They have. And at wide receiver, you're really unproven. DJ Chark is a guy. And what does he look like in Matt Canada's offense? I'm sure he probably has an expanded role with, his usage of fly sweeps, et cetera. But you don't have known commodities out wide. The defense has always carried them. Are they good enough to do what some have said they would be capable of doing and beating in Alabama or maybe even in Auburn this year in that West Division? I think that's asking a lot of this LSU program, especially under what is the first year as a head coach at LSU anyway, and Ed Ogeron.
Matt Stinchcomb, you'll see him later on SEC Now. You need to do this more often. I mean, you just handle these calls with great aplomb.
Well, I filibustered Austin.
Call.
Filibustered that Kentucky call.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to the Paul Finebaum Show podcast. The Paul Finebaum Show airs weekdays on the SEC Network, beginning at 3 Eastern.